Disney since October of 2003. I know this place. I know the worldwide leader that is ESPN, who's under the umbrella of Disney. And it wasn't difficult for me to figure out what was transpiring.
This is a shakedown. This is all being orchestrated by Tony Buzbee. You know what happened, and you're trying to manipulate the media. Gabby and Tony Buzbee want $50 million. What they're getting is sued for defamation.
I really enjoyed my time at ESPN. They did what they felt they needed to do, and I'm at peace with that. Mainly when people see me, I'm at the airport, I'm at the gym.
Oh, you getting freaky.
Huh?
You know, because of you, I always check to see if my phone is on. Like, I make sure it's locked.
Everybody always talk about date your age, date your age. Well, I want to date my wage. I'm finna shut all this ish down tonight. I want to date my wage.
Stay right there.
Where y'all at?
Here we go. The truth about Shannon Sharpe is darker than anyone expected. Forget the rumors. Forget the watered-down headlines. Because what really went down at ESPN is way bigger than a suspension or some temporary leave. Shannon Sharpe didn't just step aside. He was fired, terminated. Disney slammed the door shut on one of their highest-paid stars, and the timing is just too crazy to ignore. And before you think you already know this story, let me stop you right there. Because the receipts are wild. We're talking audio recordings hidden away for years, text messages that'll leave you speechless, and a track record of behavior that nobody in the industry wanted to touch until now. This wasn't some random fallout. This was the hammer finally dropping. Andrew Marchand at The Athletic was the first to break it, and Barrett Media locked in confirmation straight from ESPN. This wasn't speculation, it was official. The network cut him loose without hesitation. And that's not even the most shocking part. What'll have you scratching your head is the timing. This firing came just 12 days. Yes, only 12 days, after Shannon Sharpe thought he dodged a bullet by settling that massive $50 million lawsuit. 12 days after thinking he was in the clear, his entire career came crashing down. What kind of dirt could be so bad that Disney, the biggest media empire on earth, decided to risk everything by cutting ties with him so fast? Let me break this down for you in full, because once you see how it all started, you'll realize this downfall was written in stone. To understand why Shannon Sharpe's empire came crumbling down, we gotta rewind all the way back to January 3rd, 2024, the day that looked like his biggest victory, but in reality was the beginning of the end. That date wasn't just another career highlight, it was the pinnacle of Shannon's media life. The same day his fate got sealed, and the same day Katt Williams basically called his entire collapse before it even happened. Think about it. Shannon Sharpe sat down with Katt for what turned into the most watched podcast interview in history. 89 million views and still climbing on YouTube. This wasn't just viral, it was legendary, cementing Shannon as the face of podcasting and sports commentary. But inside that 3-hour marathon, Katt Williams dropped a chilling prophecy that would come back to haunt Shannon in ways he never imagined. Katt's words hit different now, because they weren't just jokes or wild stories, they were warnings. At the time, everybody thought he was throwing shots at Diddy or some Hollywood elites, but nah, those words carried a darker truth. Fast forward, and reports started surfacing that Katt's so-called rants lined up with scandal after scandal hitting celebrities in 2024 and 2025. He wasn't just clowning, he was dead on about people's careers getting torched. And here's the kicker. Shannon Sharpe was sitting right there, nodding, laughing, thinking none of it applied to him. Why wouldn't he? The man had just left Fox Sports, signed a monster deal with ESPN, was pocketing millions, and had Club Shay Shay blowing up everywhere. He thought he was untouchable, a king at the top of the mountain. What he didn't realize is that he was sitting across from a prophet, and Katt was basically reading his future out loud while Shannon smirked like he was safe. Now I'm about to walk you step by step through the exact timeline of how Shannon Sharpe went from king of the sports world to flat out unemployed in less than 18 months. And let me warn you now, this story gets ugly fast, because behind all the fame, the podcast, the big checks, there were 3 separate incidents involving Shannon and women that ESPN had on their radar, 3 strikes, and that final one, the audio recordings tied to it were the nail in the coffin, the cherry on top of a scandal nobody could spin away. For those who only know Shannon as a talking head on TV, don't get it twisted. This man was never some random analyst begging for airtime. He's a Hall of Fame tight end, one of the greatest to ever do it on the field. 14 seasons in the NFL, racking up over $22 million in earnings. But here's the twist. As much as he thrived in football, the media game made him even richer. His Fox Sports deal was pulling in $3 million a year. ESPN came in with a similar bag, but that was just the tip of it. His real money came from what he built on the side, his own media empire. After that explosive breakup with Skip Bayless, Shannon flipped the script. He launched Club Shay Shay, and when people thought that was the peak, he dropped Nightcap with Chad Okocinco, another hit. Then he smartly kept popping up on First Take, keeping his name fresh in front of millions of sports fans daily, and funneling that attention straight into his own brand. That was genius. The formula was working perfectly. Shannon wasn't just earning, he was printing money. Club Shay Shay was raking in millions. The Katt Williams interview alone pulled $6 million by itself. And before everything collapsed, Shannon was deep in talks for podcast deals valued at over $100 million. That's the kind of territory Joe Rogan sits in. But all that success couldn't shield him from the truth creeping in the background. Those 3 incidents, those whispers ESPN couldn't ignore, and the recordings waiting to explode. Shannon built his empire brick by brick, but he had no idea the cracks in the foundation were already spreading. One single 3-hour conversation was about to change Shannon Sharpe's entire life. Bet even reported he was on the verge of locking in a historic $100 million deal for Club Shay Shay. From catching touchdowns to cashing monster checks, Shannon was winning big, bigger than ever before. But then came April 2025, the month everything flipped upside down. Before we dive into that collapse, we need to rewind to the very first strike, the one nobody ever talks about. This one didn't happen at ESPN, it happened back at Fox Sports, and they worked overtime to bury it. Now let me be clear, these are all allegations, but the way it was handled tells you everything you need to know. According to legal filings tied to the lawsuit that later mentioned Joy Taylor and Skip Bayless, there was also an alleged situation involving a young production assistant named Nushan Faraji. Front Office Sports reported that Fox and Shannon quietly reached a settlement worth several $100,000 to keep the alleged incident from ever going public. And what was that incident? Sources described it as a light physical interaction, but whispers behind the scenes called it a choking incident. No police report, no courtroom, just a fat check and a non-disclosure agreement to make sure it disappeared. Quiet money to make a loud problem vanish. But here's why this matters. It was the first red flag in what would later look like a pattern of behavior. The type of pattern that networks like Disney can't ignore once the spotlight gets too bright. And this wasn't just any Shannon Sharpe. This was the same man who had that explosive public beef with Skip Bayless on air. The same man who projected strength and dominance every chance he got. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Fox was keeping secrets that now look like the opening chapter of a much bigger story. You remember that infamous Skip Bayless tweet during the Bills-Bengals game when Damar Hamlin was literally fighting for his life on the field? Shannon Sharpe skipped the very next show in protest, and when he finally came back, he and Skip exploded into one of the most heated on-air clashes ever. At the time, everybody thought Shannon's Fox exit was all about that feud with Skip, but looking back now, you gotta wonder, did Fox really cut him loose just because of Bayless? Or were they quietly relieved to see him go because of everything else bubbling under the surface? Either way, Shannon landed at ESPN and life looked perfect. Until September 2024, when disaster struck. Because on September 11, 2024, Shannon Sharpe pulled off one of the most embarrassing, career-damaging social media slip-ups in history. If you somehow missed it, let me paint the picture. Shannon went live on Instagram, and not by accident. To his 3.2 million followers, he ended up broadcasting audio of himself hooking up with someone. No filter, no warning, just pure chaos streaming live. At first, Shannon tried to brush it off, blaming hackers, but that cover story didn't last long. On his Nightcap podcast, he finally admitted the truth. He wasn't hacked, it wasn't a prank. He straight up admitted it was him, bragging that he was just a healthy, active male. But here's where it got even weirder. He doubled down and suggested it wasn't really an accident at all, almost like he wanted people to hear it. The internet went nuclear, Twitter memes, IG reposts, TikToks, it spread everywhere. Even Katt Williams and Chad Johnson couldn't resist clowning him, throwing shots, and laughing it off. What should have been a private mistake turned into a public circus, and ESPN suddenly had a very different kind of problem on their hands. A star analyst becoming the punchline of the sports world. Here's where it all comes crashing down. After that Instagram fiasco, ESPN did something shocking. They stood by Shannon Sharpe. No suspension, no fine, no step away statement. They were embarrassed, sure, but they chose to ride it out. And that one decision would come back to haunt them in the worst possible way. Because let's be real, when you accidentally broadcast yourself hooking up to millions of followers, that's the universe telling you to move different. But Shannon didn't listen. He thought he was untouchable. He had Disney in his corner. His podcasts were dominating. And that $100 million Club Shay Shay deal was practically waiting for his signature. He was living like nothing could touch him. Then came the bombshell. Just 7 months later, the scandal that ended his mainstream career forever dropped out of the sky. On April 21st, 2025, a lawsuit hit the courts that would shatter everything. A woman, identified at first only as Jane Doe, filed a civil lawsuit against Shannon Sharpe, not for a few million, not for a payout, but for a staggering $50 million. The accusations: sexual assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress. These weren't light claims, these were career-killing allegations, and the woman behind the case eventually revealed to be OnlyFans model Gabriela Zuniga. And she wasn't walking in alone. She had a powerhouse attorney at her side, Tony Buzz, the same lawyer who went after NFL quarterback Deshaun Watson and rattled the entire league. According to CNN's reporting, Zuniga alleged that Shannon violently assaulted her, ignoring her pleas to stop, in October 2024 and again in January 2025. Two separate incidents, just months apart. This wasn't just another tabloid headline. This was the kind of lawsuit that leaves a permanent stain. And suddenly, Shannon's empire, his $100 million future, and his ESPN career were all dangling by a thread. This is where the story goes completely off the rails, because Shannon Sharpe actually thought it was a smart move to release the text messages between him and this OnlyFans model. And honestly, you don't need to be a detective to figure out what was really going on here. Let me give you a warning though, these messages are graphic, and yes, they came straight from Shannon himself. So here's what Gabriela Zuniga texted Shannon on October 7th, 2023. I know you missed this big juicy A. It's $25,000 for each cheek. But she didn't stop there. She followed up with, only if you put that baby gravy in me, then I can do whatever I want. And then she doubled down. I want you to put a big black baby in me, and you better crave it, because you're going to be stuck with it for life after you do. That's 3 different ways of saying the same thing. She wanted a pregnancy as a lifetime contract. Basically, lock me in so I'm set for life. And somehow, Shannon Sharpe either didn't see it or didn't care. The fact that he was this oblivious is almost unbelievable. But here's the real twist. Shannon's camp thought dropping these texts would help him. They wanted to prove that everything was consensual, that she was the one chasing him, not the other way around. On paper, it sounded like a defense. In reality, it was a disaster, because Tony Buzz, Gabriela's attorney, came armed with something far more damaging than a few flirty texts. He had audio recordings, and once you hear what was allegedly on those tapes, you'll understand instantly why Disney, ESPN, and every executive in the building knew they had no choice but to cut Shannon loose. The texts were embarrassing enough, but the recordings, they were the death blow to his career. This is the moment everything changed, the point of no return. Tony Buzz dropped the hammer and released the audio recordings of phone calls between Shannon and Gabriela, and these tapes were beyond damaging. They weren't rumors anymore. They weren't court documents. They were Shannon's own voice, raw, unfiltered, and impossible to deny. In one of the recordings, Gabriela can be heard saying, "Don't manipulate me." And Shannon's reply, "It's chilling. If you say that one more time, I'm gonna choke the out of you when I see you." Gabriela pushes back, "Well, I don't want to be choked." And Shannon doubles down, "Yes, you do. I don't think you have a choice in the matter." That's it. Game over. When you're working under the Disney banner, the company that owns Mickey Mouse, Marvel, ESPN, and ABC, there is zero chance you survive audio like that. Threatening to choke someone on tape? That's career suicide, plain and simple. But the nightmare didn't end there, because once those recordings surfaced, people immediately connected the dots back to the quiet Fox Sports settlement years earlier. Suddenly, the so-called light physical interaction story looked a whole lot like part of a pattern. Shannon tried to push back hard. On April 22nd, just one day after the lawsuit hit, he dropped a video online calling the whole case a shakedown. But instead of saving face, he made things worse. Because here's where he messed up big time. Instead of posting a polished statement, he accidentally uploaded a screenshot of a text message from his legal team. That blunder had the entire internet roasting him for days. Memes, jokes, clips, people weren't just dragging the accusations, they were clowning Shannon for not even being able to post a denial correctly. At this point, the lawsuit was ugly, the audio was lethal, and Shannon himself was fumbling every move. ESPN's decision was already written on the wall. Shannon Sharpe was in full damage control mode, scrambling to save what was left of his career. Just 2 days after the audio leaked, he announced he was temporarily stepping away from ESPN, promising fans he'd be back in time for the NFL preseason. ESPN followed up with a carefully worded statement, calling the matter serious, and claiming they supported Shannon's decision to step aside. But here's what most people never heard. According to NBC Sports, ESPN executives were already preparing to yank him off the air, whether he liked it or not. Shannon didn't walk away on his own terms. The network was about to push him out anyway. Stephen A. Smith, who knows how Disney operates better than anyone, saw the future right away. In May, on Big Boy TV, Stephen A. flat out said Shannon couldn't stay on the air, though he hoped for a miracle comeback. Later, in an interview cited by Awful Announcing, he broke it down bluntly. Disney doesn't play games when it comes to morality clauses. If you embarrass the corporation, you're gone. And with Shannon's pile of scandals, Stephen A. knew the clock was ticking. Fast forward to July 18, 2025. After 3 brutal months of legal warfare, the lawsuit came to an end. Both sides announced a mutually agreed upon resolution for an undisclosed amount. The case was dismissed with prejudice, which meant Gabriella couldn't refile. No criminal charges were ever filed. And in a bizarre twist, Shannon and Gabriella even issued a joint statement admitting they had a long-term, consensual, but tumultuous relationship. For a brief moment, it looked like Shannon had beaten the system. For 12 days, he probably breathed easy, thinking the nightmare was over. The lawsuit was behind him, no jail time, no trial. He was already daydreaming about his ESPN comeback, plotting how to reclaim the spotlight and get back to that big money. But behind the scenes, ESPN executives were having very different conversations. And then, on July 30th, 2025, at 11:45 a.m. Pacific time, the hammer dropped. Andrew Marchand broke the story. ESPN had officially cut ties with Shannon Sharpe. Not suspended, not on leave, fired, terminated on the spot. TMZ confirmed it within minutes, and the rap went even further, reporting that the $50 million settlement was the final straw that sealed Shannon's fate. One of the biggest stars in sports media had just been erased overnight. Shannon Sharpe's final social media posts before the axe fell were almost surreal. He was smiling with whiskey bottles, celebrating his brother Sterling's Hall of Fame induction, posting happy family pics, all while ESPN executives were quietly preparing to end his entire career. The contrast couldn't have been darker, and here's what people really need to understand. This wasn't about one bad night or one lawsuit. This was about a pattern Disney had no choice but to address. First, there was the Fox Sports settlement that cost hundreds of thousands to bury an alleged choking incident. Then came the Instagram Live fiasco, where Shannon accidentally broadcast himself in bed to 3.2 million followers, humiliating the brand. Add in the $50 million lawsuit with the damning audio tapes, where he could be heard threatening to choke a woman, and finally, his sloppy, almost laughable attempt at defending himself. Disney could weather one controversy. They could even spin 2. But when you got multiple scandals, payouts, and actual recordings of violent threats tied to a man sitting on ESPN's biggest shows, that's a firestorm no PR team can survive. The Washington Post confirmed this decision wasn't made by some middle manager. It came from the top of Disney itself. The message was clear. We're done. We don't want anything to do with Shannon Sharpe. So what happens next? The traditional TV doors are shut. ESPN cut him. Fox isn't taking him back after that hush money settlement. NBC, CBS, ABC, No way they touch a liability this radioactive. On the surface, it looks like the end of Shannon's media career. But here's the twist. Shannon may not even need them anymore. His podcast empire is still standing strong. Club Shay Shay is pushing close to 4 million YouTube subscribers. Nightcap with Chad Johnson still pulls huge numbers. And the biggest advantage, Shannon owns every bit of his content. No networks, no middlemen, no bosses to answer to. He lost Disney, but in today's media game, he might still have the one thing that matters most, his audience. Now the real question is this: will the money stick around, or will Shannon be left out in the cold? Some advertisers already bailed the minute the lawsuit dropped. Industry insiders reported that the $100 million Club Shay Shay deal, the crown jewel everyone thought was in the bag, completely collapsed the second the legal storm hit. That check vanished before he could even touch it. But here's the wild card. Shannon still has a path forward if he dares to go fully independent. Dan Le Batard did it after leaving ESPN, built his own empire, and never looked back. Pat McAfee, he walked away from traditional TV, stacked his own numbers, then made ESPN cut him a check for $85 million to come back on his terms. The blueprint is already out there. And it's not like options are scarce. Amazon is throwing money at sports content. Netflix just dove into live events. Even FanDuel TV is hunting for personalities who can bring eyeballs. And let's be real, these platforms don't care about controversy, they care about views. If Shannon can keep the audience locked in, somebody will cut him a deal. But let's rewind to where this all began. January 3rd, 2024. Shannon sat across from Katt Williams in that record-breaking interview, laughing and talking like he was untouchable. And Katt looked him dead in the eye and said, "All eyes will be exposed." 18 months later, here we are. Prophecy fulfilled, empire shattered, and the world still watching to see if Shannon Sharpe rises again or fades into scandal's shadow. Shannon Sharpe's story is the definition of a modern rise and fall. A Hall of Fame career, a podcast empire, millions in the bank, and a Disney deal that should have cemented him as untouchable. All wiped out in less than 2 years. What started as whispers turned into lawsuits, settlements, leaked texts, and damning audio recordings that no PR machine could spin away. And when Disney finally cut ties, it wasn't just a firing, it was a warning shot to every star under their banner. Because let's be honest, ESPN can handle one scandal, maybe two. But when you've got a pattern of payoffs, viral embarrassments, and audio proof of violent threats, there's no saving you. Disney doesn't gamble with its brand. And Shannon, he became too hot to touch. Now the only question left is whether Shannon goes out like a fallen giant or reinvents himself like McAfee and Le Batard. He still has millions of fans, millions of subscribers, and complete ownership of his content. Which means his fate isn't in the hands of ESPN anymore. It's in his. But one thing's for sure, this saga proves the truth always finds its way out no matter how high up you are. And if you think this was wild, trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. Keep it locked right here on BarzBuzz, because the next bombshell is coming sooner than you think.